Hello and welcome. This is Tips for the Transition, the Career Roadmap, and I'm Maria Tomás-Keegan. I created this show to share stories and resources and practical strategies that help women navigate career and life challenges and to know that they're not alone. Each week, my guest and I co create a show to encourage women to be more confident, resilient, and brave in their career and in their life choices. So you can find this show on E360 TV network on your favorite streaming service like Roku and Apple TV and Amazon Fire. And we stream live weekly on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook as well. And if you prefer to listen to your podcasts, you can also find us on all the podcast channels. So if something inspires you today and you want more of the same, please subscribe to your favorite channel, leave us a comment, and share your favorite episodes far and wide so we can create more ripples among women around the world. And don't forget, check out the show notes below because that will give you some great links to connect directly to my guest and me. So, toxic work cultures and workplace bullying are two of the worst experiences we can face in our careers, and no one will thrive in either situation. Yet it's prevalent enough that we're spending this episode with an expert on the subject of addressing them head on. Catherine Mattice is a workplace bullying expert, TEDx speaker, culture consultant, strategic HR advisor, and mentor. And she is the driving force behind Civility Partners, a consulting firm focused on helping organizations create respectful workplace cultures and specializing in turning around toxic environments. Civility Partners clients range from Fortune 500s to small businesses across many industries. Catherine is an HR thought leader, often featured in USA Today, Bloomberg's, CNN, and NPR. She's an award-winning speaker, author, and blogger with 53 courses reaching global audiences on LinkedIn Learning. She has an award-winning book. It's called Back Off: Your Kick-Ass Guide to Ending Bullying at Work. And it was hailed by international leadership guru Ken Blanchard as the most comprehensive and valuable handbook on the topic. So I can't wait to have this conversation with Catherine. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
It is my pleasure. And, I love to get started with my guests. Just a little bit of a backstory, Catherine. How did this topic of bullying and toxic workplaces become a passion of yours?
I was the director of human resources for an organization where another director, so my peer, was essentially engaging in bullying behaviors. He was a micromanager. He yelled. He made it very clear who in the office he liked versus who he didn't like. I felt he was insubordinate to the president of the organization. And so, as the director of HR, I was dealing with all of the drama that he created. People were spending time in my office, and I was dealing with the turnover in his department. And I also felt picked on. I definitely was one of his targets. While I was working there, I decided to get a master's degree in communication. And my very first semester, one of my classes was called The Dark Side of Communication. So we had to write a paper on something dark in human communication. And so I thought, well, I'm going to write about this person at work. I kind of want to understand him, as frustrated as I am. And so I set out to write a paper, came across the phrase workplace bullying, realized it's exactly what I was going through, and that my scenario was pretty standard according to the research. And I was shocked to find there's, at the time, 20 years of academic research on the topic from around the world. And so that became my mission in grad school. Everything I did in graduate school, no matter the class, my research, my thesis, all of it was on bullying. So I joke, I have a master's degree in workplace bullying. And then I realized, this is a problem that is not being addressed in the United States. And so I started Civility Partners and I wrote my book pretty quickly out of grad school. And here I am.
Wow. You are so right. What you described is so common. Experienced that many times in my long career in corporate.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about what some of the most common characteristics are. You mentioned a couple of them, but those characteristics that are displayed by abrasive leaders or workplace bullies, what are some of those?
Sure, I can do you one better and give you three categories of behavior. So, what I find is when we're using phrases like bullying or abrasive or even harassment, even if it's not technical, illegal harassment, the three buckets are aggressive communication. So, getting in someone's personal space, aggressive nonverbals, eyes popping out of your head and your veins pumping, on your forehead. And so just nasty emails. So communication that most people could look at and say, yeah, that's aggressive. The second bucket is humiliation, calling out mistakes in public, shaming people, punitively punishing someone for maybe a small mistake or even a big mistake, but you keep bringing it up. So doing things that are isolating and humiliating the target. And then the third bucket is manipulation. So that's where the passive aggressive behaviors come in. That's where giving someone not enough information to do a task that they're assigned, giving someone so much work it's not possible for them to complete it, using performance reviews as a way to sort of bully someone and claim someone's a not a good performer. So those are the buckets: aggressive communication, humiliation, and manipulation.
Boy, we can think of lots of things that fall under each one of those, can't we?
Yep. So I would say any bullying behavior you may have experienced or witnessed will fall in one of those three categories.
And maybe sometimes in multiple categories.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So let's talk about the why.
Mhm.
What is it that causes people to engage in these bullying behaviors?
That's a great question. So, contrary to popular belief, they are not psychopaths generally. I think I've met a few, but they are good people at heart. I know that can be hard to hear if you're at the receiving end because it certainly doesn't feel that way. What's happened is these individuals have gotten very focused on competence. And I've noticed a pattern because I coach these individuals exclusively that they've all been fighting for something their whole lives. So there's a reason they're really focused on competence. It could be kind of lack of love from their parents. It could be, they were the only female in medical school at the time when it was all males. It could be, there's just always this story of this individual I'm coaching fighting to prove something. And so you couple that with the rewards and promotions they're receiving from the organization for all of those amazing results they get because they're focused on competence. They're really high performers. So over time, they get more and more permission to act that way. And then lastly, they are lacking some empathy. They're not. So what I find when I talk with these individuals is they recognize that people don't like working with them. They recognize that people see them as a hard manager. And their response is more like, well, I'm just holding them accountable, or it's not my fault that they're lazy, and they're missing something there with the empathy and they're lacking kind of social sonar to understand how damaging their behavior really is. And then that's where the coaching comes in, is once I show them how damaging their behavior is, 95% of the time they're mortified and appalled that this is how people really see them, and they didn't know that they were perceived so awful and they want to change. So that's the recipe.
That's so interesting to hear the way you describe that these are essentially good people who just don't realize what they're doing
Mm-hmm.
or the effect they have
Mm-hmm.
on others. So are there any factors that contribute to that?
Well, so the organ, they're getting mixed messages. So what happens, the factor that contributes is the organization. So
Mm,
what's happening is people complain to HR. HR is probably talking to this individual saying, hey, I'm hearing that you're yelling or you're doing this or that. And they're thinking, well, A, you're HR, people are going to complain. And B, does it really matter? Because I'm also getting a lot of accolades from the CEO. And look at, I'm the executive VP, or I get big bonuses. I'm in charge of this big project. So the organization's rewarding them, and
mm,
HR is trying to get them to stop behaving that way. So, and then, this is over the course of their life, right? Because
right.
no organizations really are holding people accountable for behavior that doesn't include bullying. So,
Unless they're not also performing, right?
right, exactly. Yeah, if I'm bullying and not performing, it's real easy to say, get out. But
Yeah.
yeah, HR, I find, has been, when I have these kind of sales calls with HR who's looking for a coach, that's the narrative. They've been trying to get the CEO to address it for a long time. And the CEO has been saying, just leave it be. We need them. Don't. And so their CEO is living in real fear that if this individual is held accountable, they're going to say, fine, I'll go bully somewhere else. I'm going to take all my, great results and achievements and go somewhere else where I can bully, which is kind of silly because that never happens.
So it's as though the organization is condoning this behavior
100%.
and they are hearing from HR that it is unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the mixed messaging that you're talking about.
Yeah. And then HR, can only get so far. I was that HR person where I was trying to get the president to address the behavior and I couldn't talk him into it. I mean, I tried all sorts of things. I even pulled out an Excel sheet and tried to calculate, how much money I thought this person had cost the organization. And the president kind of was like, oh, it's not that high of a number. It's like he just saw, and he was, it was all just my thoughts. I think I've spent this much time on turnover, and here's my hourly rate when you break my salary down. And even that didn't seem to faze him. So HR is trying to fix a problem that they don't have permission to fix.
So what do we do about that?
Well, unfortunately, often this what happens is the CEO gets a smack in the face, as I say, some sort of catalyst happens where they finally say, "Okay, I hear you, HR. Find a resource. Let's try to help this person," and that's where I come in. I do think. In general, there's a lot more conversations in the workplace around employee and the employee experience and culture. There was obviously a ton of research that came out during COVID about the mass exodus, that it was related to toxic environments, the way people were feeling at work, where people weren't going, oh, I'm just going to go home and start a yoga studio and quit being a lawyer. It was more of, I don't want to work here anymore. And now that
Mhm.
everybody's remote, I'm going to go find somebody somewhere else where I'm treated better. So I think hopefully over time, as the working world gets nicer and nicer, we're more empathetic to our employees, that maybe over time it would phase out or become minimal.
Or maybe be recognized as the unacceptable behavior because it is not the norm.
Exactly. Yeah. And
Yeah,
that's what we do with clients. We get really focused on their core values. And hey, if you're holding people accountable to the core values, then this behavior is very clearly unacceptable. So we got to get rid of that
right.
gray area.
Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit about how you work with companies? What does first of all, what does it take for them to bring you in?
Yeah, so usually because we turn around toxic work environments. That's what we do, and that's how we market ourselves. We have clients who aren't toxic and just they're good and they want to be better. So those are, we have fewer of those types of clients. So generally what happens is either there's a new CEO who's recognizing I need to understand what's going on. Let's get a survey going, which is often where we start when we're working with clients. Or it could be that maybe they're required to do a survey through their professional association that the company is, or it could be that turnover is just still not going down, lots of people leaving. So there's something happening in an organization that causes them to say, we need to understand what's going on so that we can fix it. And that's when they reach out to us. So we do a workforce survey. We call it a climate assessment, where we're measuring lots of things like employee engagement, trust in the leadership team, relationships within teams, inclusivity and psychological safety. So we're looking at a variety of constructs. And then we're able to take all of that data and help the organization understand exactly what to do to address that data. So, hey, 20% of people answered this question positively. We want it to be 80 to 100% of people answering it positively. What do we do? And so we really take the idea of culture and make it very tangible and actionable through that process. And then a lot of our change involves things like, company-wide training programs to teach people things like civility, what to do if you witness even something really subtle that feels inappropriate. We do a lot of manager trainings on how does a middle manager coach somebody who's a gossip on their team, for example. So really giving a lot of tools to the organization around behavior. And then we often do a lot of performance management system upgrades where we're helping the organization really hold people accountable to that, the core values. So we do a huge array of different things to help the organization figure out what's wrong and how to fix it. And then we kind of lead them through that process. And then, of course, we also specialize in coaching leaders accused of bullying.
Yeah. So, it occurs to me that I'm just thinking back to some of the situations that I faced over the years. I almost always worked in male-dominated industries, and was a bit of a square peg in a round hole, being a collaborator, not a competitor. But I wonder, is there anything that we as individuals can do about, I'm sure reporting it is one thing we can do, but is there anything we can do when we are faced with aggressive leaders or people who are bullying us?
Yeah. So the book Back Off is full of tons of tips. So definitely, if you are looking for those, check that out. But I can say the earlier you address it, the better. So the moment somebody steps on you at work, address it. Because what happens is if you don't, they subconsciously recognize that I have some power over you. I can dominate you. And again, these aren't, people who engage in bad behavior at work. They're not waking up every morning excited to make everybody's lives miserable. They've developed a really bad habit over time because the organization's allowed them to. So if you can nip it in the bud right away, there's tons of research, and I've experienced it myself, that there's all of a sudden a respect that I cannot dominate you, so I won't push on you, right? So all that aside, go ahead.
No, I was just, give us an example of what we could do or say to nip it in the bud, as you say.
Yeah. So I always like asking questions. That's a great way to not come across, if you're worried about coming across as insubordinate because this person's your boss, or you're worried about getting super aggressive or assertive yourself. So you could ask a question. You could say something like, did you know that you're coming across as yelling right now? Or did you know that yesterday in the staff meeting you said this thing? I wanted to talk to you about it. So kind of approaching it from a place of curiosity is a great way to, whoever's asking questions holds the power. And so it's a way to, kind of get your power without being, yesterday you did this and, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
I will share my story with you because it's a great story. So after I left the organization where this person bullied, I went on to work at a startup tech firm. They had just gotten a $10 million investment, and they had 5 people and they were going to be growing. And so they hired me to build their HR and help them hire and do all the HR stuff. And because it was a startup, everybody wears multiple hats. And somehow I ended up doing some of the customer service. I'm not in tech. I have no idea what's going on. So the chances of me making a mistake were pretty high. But, of course, I'm doing what I'm asked. And I did make a very big mistake. Some sort of e-newsletter went out to a client's or to one of our clients' customers. And apparently there was, I don't remember exactly, but I made a mistake. The CEO sends me an email and he CCs the entire office. So at this point, we're talking about maybe 20, 25 people. And it says, he really just reamed me for this mistake. And here's that nip in the bud moment. I thought, not again. I'm not willing to work here if that's what it's like. So I'm just going to take my chances. I hit reply to all. He had involved all these people, so I'm going to involve them too. I hit reply to all and I just said, yes, I made a mistake. Here are the 3 options I can think of to solve it. I'd love for you to tell me which solution you'd like me to implement. And if you'd like to talk about my mistake further, we're going to do it in your office with the door closed. And I hit send. And within a couple seconds of me hitting send, he comes out of his office and yells across the whole office, "Great email, Kat. Way to put the hammer down. I deserve that." So it was that respect. He saw he was not going to be able to talk to me like that, especially in front of other people. And he never spoke to me like that again.
That is a great story. That is a great story. And we have to get over the intimidation,
Mm-hmm.
right? That can arise when
Mm-hmm.
someone attacks you, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's natural to feel that. The fear, right,
Yep.
of retribution, right? And the fear of what are people going to think about me, of
Mm-hmm.
me, if I do that? And am I as bad as he or she if I do something about it? Am I doing the same thing back?
Right.
Lots of
And
that stuff going on in
yeah,
our head, right?
absolutely. And I think, in that situation, I was willing to be fired. I thought to myself, if he yells out of this door, "You're fired, don't speak to me that way." Okay, fine. I'm not going to work here if you're going to treat me that way. So I think that's a big is that decision, kind of like when you're going to buy a car, recognize that you have an absolute boundary and you're not going to let this car salesman
Yeah.
cross it. And
Yeah.
that's where I was at. But unfortunately, I had all of that gumption because of my previous experience, where I did let it go. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it does take some practice, unfortunately,
Yep.
that we our boundaries are soft, and it happens, and we let it,
Mm-hmm.
and we realize that what we've done is granted permission
Mm-hmm.
for people to treat us that way.
Right.
So getting really, really clear about what matters most to you, what your values are, and
Mm-hmm.
how you honor them, how you stand firmly in them, and what are the boundaries you set around that behavior. How do you teach people how to treat you?
Right.
by the way you respond to their behavior.
Right. I like that phrase. How do you teach people how to interact? I'll share something else. So I have another book. It's such a long title. Let me look on my wall. Stand Up, Speak Out Against Workplace Bullying. And that book is a collection of stories that I put together with the National Workplace Bullying Coalition. So if you buy a copy, they get all the proceeds. And we were curious about what makes someone successful in overcoming bullying because the research is very dire. Now, at this point, there's 40 years of academic research, 99% of which says if you get bullied, you're doomed, essentially. HR is not going to help you. If you try to sue, good luck, because it's not illegal. It's not a pretty picture. And I'm into positive psychology. I'm a very optimistic person, and I would say I'm successful. I'm not hindered by that experience. In fact, it catapulted me to having a great life. So we were curious, what other kind of, what are there other people like me, essentially, and what's their story? What we found in the 28 stories that we collected, a lot, only 28 of them made it into the book, was that the defining factor in considering yourself successful was the decision not to deal with it anymore, or to do something. And that decision's different depending on who you're talking to. So for me, I actually got fired from my job. My performance suffered so much. I didn't decide to be fired, but I decided what I'm going to do with that is, finish out my master's degree and write a book, and I'm going to get focused on this. And so, I made a decision. This is not going to take me out. Another woman's story, she's a professor at the Coast Guard Academy. And she basically says, I'm Black, I'm a female, I have a PhD, I'm a lesbian, I got 4 strikes against me. I could either leave or duke this out. And she decided to duke it out. So she's, I kind of joke, she's the Martin Luther King of the Coast Guard Academy, but she decided to be that. It wasn't
Right.
And so that's the thing. You have to say, I'm not doing this. And then whatever that means, whatever that decision looks like, is going to vary. But that's how you survive.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. It requires making a decision, as you say, making a choice about what you will tolerate and what you won't.
Yep.
Right. And there's a line, and when the line gets crossed, then you take whatever action you deem necessary because of the choice you made.
Yep. Exactly.
And standing firmly in that. And I think that's where a lot of people waver, is that, oh, it wasn't that bad this time, right? Kind of giving forgiveness where it's not due.
And I would add to that, redefining what success means, which is what we learned from these stories we had collected, was that if you're, if you have a 9-to-5 job, it pays your bills, it's really hard to have a boundary and say, I don't care if I get fired, I'm going to stand up for myself. I get that. And then you also have society, all your friends and family, if you were to get fired, let's say, they're all going to feel sorry for you. Oh my gosh, that was awful. You got yourself fired, or you quit. How could you do, that the bully won, you quit. And so you have all this like chitter chatter about what success looks like. And that's what we found in the academic research, was like, stop defining success as the bully. You tell on the bully and they get fired immediately and they go to hell. It's like, that's not the story.
Right.
And so really deciding that, and it takes a lot. I know this is a tall order, but deciding, I'm okay with the outcome of me setting up my boundaries. And if I get fired, it's a win because I can figure out something else to do. Or if I have to quit to get away from this, it's a win because I'm taking care of myself. So don't let society don't let the chitter chatter disrupt what you think success should look like for you.
Right. That's such great advice, because don't allow their judgment of your action, what you chose to do, right?
Right.
So, and again, standing firm in what success means to you in this situation,
Right.
and taking care of yourself first, because nobody else will do it,
Right.
right? Nobody else will take care of you first, except you.
Right.
Yeah, there are so many shades of gray here, aren't there,
Yes.
Catherine?
Yes. Yeah.
So, is there anything that kind of stops bullying in its tracks? Now, I heard you say confront it, don't let it slip by
Mm-hmm.
first. Is
Mm-hmm.
there is there anything else?
Yes. So power in numbers. So the more that you can, and I'll say first, I'm not suggesting you go around, getting a mob started. Isn't that person horrible? Let's all stand up. It's a process, but to go to around to your colleagues and talk with them about what you're experiencing, what are they experiencing, and if there's several of you, which there probably are, then to agree to all go to HR together so that it does become you as a group taking a stance that, we as a team do not want to work with this person. And that's how HR, you got to help HR get the CEO's attention. So,
Okay.
if you go to HR and you're crying and it's like they're mean to me, it's like, I get why that happens. I'm not discounting that, but that doesn't help the HR professional make a case for you. But if you can go with a team and say, all five of us do not like the way we're treated, it's affecting us in these ways. We need you to put a stop to it. Then HR can go to the CEO and say, look, you got five people who may quit, and then that person's useless because the whole department's going to be gone, and so really, and I know it's hard because being bullied is obviously very emotional.
Yeah.
I got fired because I wasn't performing. I was depressed. I hated it. Um, I hated going to work,
Yeah.
but that doesn't convince the CEO to say, well, these people, this one person hates working here and they're sad about it. It's got to be the business case. So you got to find a way to step out of those emotions a bit and give the HR professional something they can work with when they go to the CEO.
So approach it a bit like a class action.
A little bit.
A little
Yeah.
bit.
A little
Yep.
bit.
And
Yeah.
and I like what you said. Give the HR person the the ammunition, if you will, or the case,
Mm-hmm.
right? Help them make the case, I think is the way you put it, for to take it further,
Yes.
um, and let them know how it's affecting you personally, how it's affecting you at work,
Mm-hmm.
and your productivity, your efficiency, your behavior,
I was
even,
just going to
right?
say that when you're talking about how it's affecting you, try to keep it related to the work, right? That
Yeah,
I got yelled at in a meeting and I was upset, so I had to step outside, and I couldn't take five calls because I needed a break. That's an example of like, it hurt me, but that I'm really here because I need to know I'm having a hard time doing my job.
right.
Um, so yeah, talk about the work problem that it's
Yeah,
creating.
talk about the work problem, right, right, how it's affecting you at work.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples, maybe case studies? You've worked with a lot of corporations, large and small, that have successfully implemented your coaching method to address this abusive leadership and bullying?
Yeah, we've
I'd
got
love to
plenty of
hear
case
some.
studies on my website. So if you want to learn more about some of what we do, it's there. But yeah, to share some stories about some of the clients I coach. Just recently, I closed out coaching with a client who works at a multi-million-dollar nonprofit organization. And he reports directly to the executive director. And he comes from, kind of Wall Street finance background, and now he's at a nonprofit. And we talked, so again, going back to the idea that they're really focused on competence, a lot of our coaching conversations centered around his relationship with the coworker who he found to be fairly incompetent. And because these individuals are so competent, it's like hard to wrap their head around the fact that that person over there can't figure it out, or they're not doing it the way I would do it. What's wrong with them? So that was where their problems were coming from. And in our very last coaching session, he told me, so some part of his role was to put on these big events for large fundraising types of events with people with money. And he told me, and he was almost in tears about a heart to heart that he and this woman that he had an issue with had just a couple days before our closeout meeting. And she said to him, I know I don't always do things the way you want. I appreciate that you've been working hard to change our relationship. Thank you for all of the things you taught me. And she gave him a hug, so the two of them had a very clear shift in their relationship because of the coaching. And he was, it was just a lot of talking to him about, you have to coach her. If you don't like the way she does something and you have some ideas, then that's how you approach it, not why'd you do it that way kind of a
Right.
thing.
Right.
And so that's a great one. I love that story and just how excited he was that they were going to be able to proceed.
That there was a shift,
Yeah.
right? And,
Yep.
there's a way to lead people by example, right?
Yep. Yep.
Instead of by belittling.
Yep.
Yeah. Um,
Just real quick, another one of my success stories.
yeah.
I love sharing this one. A woman who I coached, after about a year, she emails me and she says, "My team says I'm falling off the bandwagon. I need you to coach me a little bit more. We need to reconnect." And so I coached her a little more, and I thought that was a great success because her team had felt comfortable to tell her. They
Mm.
weren't so afraid of her anymore. They were able to point out, you're kind of going back to your old ways. Stop it. And so she
Yeah, I
reached
love
out.
that. And here's what I love more. She listened,
Yep.
right? She took that to heart, and it was like a wake-up call for her.
Yep.
She goes, "Oh, yeah, you know what? They're right."
Yep.
And she reached back out to you because that worked for her.
Yep.
I love
Yep.
that. That's a great story.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a great story. You got one more?
I've got many. Another one, I mean, there's the ones on my website are both, I joke, my star students. They both really did a 180 there, where their feedback was 100% this. And then after coaching them, so just to back up, we start off by interviewing people. I interview up to 15 people. And I take all that feedback and I move it all into themes. And then I read that document to them. So it's a pretty difficult conversation for them and me. And that's where they really see the mirror of, oh my gosh, I knew people thought I was kind of mean, but holy moly, look at this damage I'm causing. And then after about 4 months of coaching, I re-interview everyone. And both of those individuals, Joe and Mercedes, their names are, they both just literally did a complete 180 and their feedback was entirely different. And Mercedes is actually a great case study in terms of just how we allow bullying to happen. She had been at the organization forever. She had tons of organizational knowledge and led a team. And one of her themes in the feedback is that she would go like this when she talks. She'd get real that aggressive body language in conjunction with her facial expressions and her posture and everything. And when I spoke to HR, as the coaching was commencing, she's like, everyone just says Mercedes just passionate. She's just passionate. I'm sick of people saying that her passion is causing a lot of problems,
Right.
And so then people in the next round of feedback, were like, she's not doing that anymore. I'm not scared to approach her. She doesn't shame people in public anymore. So she was another really one of my faves.
Yeah, one of your faves. That's interesting that they made excuses for her,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
and that's how the condoning perpetuates, right? They
Yep.
just kept making excuses for how passionate she was, so they allowed it to continue
Yeah,
without
and good
calling
for
her on it.
HR that she had the CEO's ear and was like, that's not passionate, or it's
Yeah.
not the right kind of passion. She can be passionate by working too many hours or completing some big project, but not by going like this at people.
Right, right. And that, like, and I'm sure she learned how to express
Mhm.
her passion differently.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
through
that's
your
the
coaching.
whole thing. Coaching is all about we I mean, in a nutshell, everybody knows you're competent. Look at your job title. Look at, where you're at. We all know you're competent. If your goal is to make your team competent or more competent, the way you're treating them is not working. And in fact, they're all saying essentially that you're not a competent leader. We read this feedback and it's saying they don't find you to be a competent leader. And so if your goal is to be competent in your job and a competent leader, you have to find new ways to talk to these people. And
Yeah.
so we joke, it's not the competence crusader. You're a coach. Use your powers for good. And so that's a lot of what ultimately the conversations boil down to. And
Yeah.
then obviously giving them tools. So, hey, Mercedes, if you feel like you want to do this because you're frustrated, what's the outcome of doing that? Okay, well, people aren't listening to you when you do that. So what are some other options for you to express that passion? And then through that process, she starts to realize, okay, people do listen when I say things this other way. And so
Yeah.
then they start to figure out the new habits are better.
Yeah. Yeah. They get more result from them.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. This is so good. I appreciate that you have laid out so many examples for us, because I think very often when we're in those situations, we do so many of the things that we have already talked about. We make excuses for them, and
Mm-hmm.
we feel intimidated, so we don't say anything. We back off.
Mm-hmm.
So many of those things, I love this conversation because it opens it it creates an environment for more conversation like this to happen.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be sharing this episode very widely, because there are a lot of
Thank you.
people who need to hear it. So I really appreciate, Catherine, that you do the work that you do, because it's so needed. That you teach people to coach others instead of bullying them.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I really appreciate that you've given us so many great examples of what it might look like that we might not be recognizing, and
Mm-hmm.
what we can do about it. So, as we do at the end of every one of my episodes, um, we call it Tips for the Transition for a reason. Can you just wrap this up in a bow for us? Give us some key takeaways or some tips and strategies that we can take with us today.
Yeah. My biggest tip is to make that decision. And I recognize it's hard to make a decision sometimes, but to really decide, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to take my power back. That is the most important thing you can do, because once you've made that decision, everything else becomes a little easier. So no wavering on, am I worried if I get fired or not? You just have to decide, I am going to put this boundary up and I'm going to address it in the way it needs to be addressed. So that's the biggest tip. And then secondly, keeping in mind that standing up for yourself doesn't have to be some big production where you're, shaming this person or being aggressive with them. Standing up for yourself could be something as simple as walking away, or when they send you a nasty email, responding and saying, I'm not going to respond to an email written like this. And that's all you have to say. It doesn't have to be a big, scary production. So hopefully recognizing it can be easy, I know I say
Mm,
that lightly,
mm,
is helpful. And then lastly, I would say, please stand up for each other. If everybody on your team is willing to push back a bit, then that's going to make a big difference. Even consider in a staff meeting, for example, if some sort of bullying behavior is happening, if you were to get up out of your chair and go and sit next to the person at the receiving end of that behavior, that sends a message right there. So again, subtle standing up for yourself and others is going to go a long way.
I love that. That's so powerful. Just show support for the people who are on the receiving end, as you say. Yeah, that's great. I love that. And you said something earlier that I like too. Whoever is asking the question holds the power. And I had to think about that for a little bit. But I believe you're right. If we are approaching a bully or an aggressive leader by asking if they realize what they're doing, then it causes a shift in the power.
Yep. It sure does. And it gives you a little ammunition. If you say, do you recognize you're yelling, or do you recognize the tone of your email was too aggressive, or whatever, they have two answers. They could either say yes, and I don't care, in which case that gives you ammunition when you go to HR, or they're going to stop and think and say, oh, sorry, so it's a
Didn't
win-win.
mean that. Yeah. All right. Well, Catherine, we could go on for a long time on this subject. You have lots of great stories to share. But we're going to wrap up here. And I would love for people to hear that website you've talked about a couple of times. What is the best place they can find all this information?
Yep, civilitypartners.com. We do a whole lot of putting content out there that's useful. If you sign up for our e-newsletter, it's not going to be a series of sales things. I just want to get information out, and that's always been my kind of marketing strategy. So lots of tangible tips and downloads. We also have something called the 16 scripts, which is essentially 16 options, questions being one. There's 15 other options in terms of things you might say in the moment that are simple, one-liner. So yeah, you can find me there. As you said, I've got LinkedIn learning courses all around these types of topics we've been talking about. So if you have access to LinkedIn learning, check us out there. And yeah,
that's fabulous. Thank you. It's just a treasure trove of resources for people who feel like they are in a toxic environment or have been bullied, maybe have an aggressive leader in their midst. So check out Catherine's website, civilitypartners.com. Thank you again, Catherine. I really appreciate your being here. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. And for those of you watching and listening, I appreciate that you're a part of our community. And if you enjoyed this episode, as I said earlier, please subscribe, comment, click a star, tell us how you feel. And as a career and life coach myself, I help women navigate challenging times more quickly and gracefully. So if something in this episode resonates and you'd like a fresh perspective about the situation you're in, reach out. And let's continue the conversation. We could do that in my private Facebook group, the Career Transition Roadmap, and the link for that is in the show notes below. So let's meet again here next Wednesday, like every Wednesday, because you know what? I believe it's our time to thrive. So let's thrive together. Until next time, I'm Maria Tomás-Keegan, helping you turn transition into triumph.